So it became very clear to people that vocalization was good for memorization and passing on information, and was also good for capturing the power of spirits. And the Word, and even in the Bible, said, God said there was the Word. And the Word created everything. So Om, and out of Om came the Big Bang, the universe. So the Word manifests power. In the Greek community, the more vowels there is in the word, the more power. My name is Mr. Natural, and when I started cutting television...
Excuse me, Mr. Natural.
Yes.
Are you referring to ancient Greek community or modern Greek?
Both. And as far back as we know, the more vowels there were in a word, the more magic that word had.
Before Homer?
Even before Homer.
And
Before the Iliad and the Odyssey. Yes.
Before that, writing was invented in Sumer.
Right. Well, writing sprung up in different places in different cultures around the world. Some of the oldest Coptic writing and hieroglyphic writing we know is some of the oldest stuff they found, carved on tombs. But recently they found things like Ogham and Ogalan languages, which they say predate the hieroglyphic. So a lot of the early writing was actually based on sign language. The Ogham language itself, which is nothing but a bunch of scratches on rocks, and for many, many years nobody knew what Ogham was. And so they'd find these rocks that just had 4 lines scratched in it, kind of the way we do tic-tac-toe, or we go, we know we've done, and then we go, and they would find these things around, and they had absolutely no idea that it was language. What they discovered was, though, the ancient, I think it was the Norsemen, the Vikings, used to do this thing where when they're on boats far away from somebody, they had a thing called semaphore, signaling. Meet me at Joe's restaurant and we'll have some coffee. And they found out that one of the things that was important about the semaphore was the shoulders. If it was above the shoulders, it meant one thing. If it was below the shoulders, it meant something else. If it was even with the shoulders, it meant something else. So they realized that there was a line, a horizon line, and that some of these lines went through the horizon lines and some only met the line. And some were under the line and some went through the line. And some went through the line sideways. And they began to realize that these were different letters of the alphabet. And how the line crossed the horizon line determined, and this was based on semaphore, this waving flags, so we could communicate at distances. Here in America, the oldest tradition that we know of this is Indian smoke signs. The Indians actually sent out semaphore by getting something that produced a lot of smoke and putting a blanket over it, and then later on a guy by the name of Morris came up with these things, dot, dash, dot, 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 dash, dash, dot, dash. And these are all forms of semaphore.
In Jack Harmer's Dharma bums, they communicate from one watchtower to another, like fire lookout,
right.
With mirrors.
With mirrors, right. And then mirror language is very common too. So you can imagine there's all kinds of ways of doing this. We also know that some of the earliest forms of music actually started out as ways of making sure that your children were not eaten by the neighbors, because the human race was basically cannibalistic in the oldest times. It is now believed that the reason Neanderthals disappeared is we ate them. That we actually did intermix. They were not separate species, and the Neanderthals died out because we were smarter and more brilliant than them. The reason they died out is they were not as horny as we were, and we had more children. And our children were hungry. And when there was no food to be gotten, they would eat their neighbors. So they would eat the Neanderthals. So we now have found, and anthropologists have just recently found, that we probably ate the Neanderthals out of existence, and that many of them did intermarry. And that the reason that the Homo sapien is not as pure a race, and that some people have what we call these throwbacks, is that they had interracial marriage had gone on. So, some guy would find a dumb Neanderthal blonde and marry her and have kids. And then what he'd do is, if he didn't like his mother-in-law, he'd just eat her.
No
not
pun
to get too much into language. I'm trying to get back to music here, though. But the point is that a lot of these, what happened is because people ate people, and there was a lot of cannibalism, and also a lot of enmity between tribes, that quite often if you crossed over into someone else's territory, they would take you as a prisoner, and chances are you would wind up in their communal pot as supper that night. So what happened is when the children would go out into the forests or into the jungles to play, they would lose, as it got towards twilight, they couldn't figure out the way home. And if they just happened to cross the river in the wrong thing and wound up on the other side, they either became slaves or dinner or some other tribe. So early tribes found out that they could take logs, hollow out logs, and beat a rhythm on the log. Boop, 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 boop. And that's the Ogalla tribe. And someone went boop, 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 boop. And that was this other tribe. And then what happens is if people left the village, they could listen for these signals and follow the signal safely home. We also have that same tradition here in America with church bells. Church bells weren't about getting people to church. They were fire alarms to let people know that the whole town was on fire so people could come and carry water to put it out. They were ways of getting people together to have mass communication. We ring the bell, everybody comes, boom, we can have a gathering, we can talk about it. The drums, the taika drums, these huge, huge Japanese drums, were originally built in monasteries to bring the monks to the monastery, and then later used as a form of meditating on the rhythm for meditation purposes. Then it became religious. Then it later became musical. So drums were some of the first things that were invented. Blown horns, such as the didgeridoo, Aborigines found hollowed out trees, and they blow on them, play one note, and then they get this one note going, and then they do things like they bark, and then they do things like alligator, and sing. And they could take one note, and it is very typical for an Aborigine who can play didgeridoo to have 50,000 songs. Imagine creating 50,000 songs out of one note. And these things then went from just gathering people around and being sort of safety mechanism to make sure people got home safe, to actually encoding language and expressing the language. Now we could beat a drum, which told a message, and send that message as far as we could hear. We could stand on a ship with lights and swing these lights around and talk to another ship way out there in the fog. People could be out to sea and other people on the land, and you could communicate. So it was the first form of long-distance telephone, if you will.
I heard about this man to go into Africa, and here's all these drum beats, and here's these drum beats. He can't figure out why is all these drum beats. So he finally sees a drummer coming up after about 24 hours, and he says, "What are you guys beating voices?" It's the only way to drum out that to drum out the bass solo.
To drum out the what?
Drum out the bass solo.
The basso?
To drown out the bass solo. Yeah.
Drowned out the basso.
Is that true?
That reminds me of how do you stop a guitar player from playing? Put music in front of them. How do you stop a classical pianist from playing? Take the music away. And that right there sums up what I have found to be the problem with the way music is taught as a mechanical thing. Because you have people who learn to read and they cannot improvise. Then you have people who learn to read by ear or play by ear, and they actually start to defend their ignorance, saying that this is a good thing. And so when you get these two camps, and what it really is some people have a left brain approach to the music and some have a right brain approach to the music. And although we have two brains, we only have one mind. And although there's a lot of us here, and there's a whole lot of stuff in the world that we know of, and there's a big universe out there, don't forget that there's only one everything.